Welcome everybody to a new season of Life Group videos. Now there's not just two of us, and now we're in a different room. So here we go. Thanks for joining us here this morning. My name is Anthony. I'm the Connections Director.
I'm Ryan. I'm the Experienced Pastor.
And I'm Fox. I'm the Production Manager.
Wonderful. I have these guys gathered with us here today. We are looking at the scripture, the passage of Luke 12, 4-5, where Jesus is challenging what it is that we're fearing, whether it's people or whether it's the Lord. Question number one, I just wanted to start with you guys around the table. What is some of your largest and possibly irrational fears?
Falling. It's not so much heights. I don't mind being like in an airplane or being in a tall building because I know that my feet are firmly planted on something very secure. But ladders, nah, I ain't about that. I think it's more about the fall than it is the height.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Intense.
I have an irrational fear of being put on the spot and not having an answer when I'm asked a question. So I'm living my fears right now.
Dang, heavy. Mine is for sure snakes. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how unvenomous that it might be. It is not okay for it to be alive.
It's very Indiana Jones of you.
I know.
It's got
I
no
did
legs
like
and still
that
moves,
too.
man. That's the devil.
Yes, literally. Genesis 2, man. Read it. Okay. Pause this video, take a moment, and answer that question as a group.
I want to take a moment and look at question number 3. It says, was Jesus speaking of a literal or figurative hell in verse 5? So I'm going to go ahead and read verse 5 here in the ESV. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. I think it's really easy for us to talk about hell and maybe not. Maybe we don't even want to talk about it. Maybe we just kind of brush it off as hell being, just not being in a healthy spot, not being happy, being disconnected from God, but we know that Jesus is talking about a very real place, and God being the only one who has all authority to be able to send anyone to hell. We all deserve to go to hell for who we are, and it's only through Jesus that we're able to not go there. So Jesus is telling the disciples, don't worry about what man thinks about you. Don't worry about what's going on day to day. You need to worry about the God who is in sovereign control of the universe, and you deserve to go to a literal hell for punishment for your sin. But because of Jesus, we are able to be not sent there. We're able to go to heaven, and so that's really what we'll see. At this point, Jesus hadn't been crucified yet, but he's setting up, fear God, fear that you can go to hell, but also Jesus will be the way for us to not have to go to this very literal, very, very scary place.
Yeah. Take a moment in your group and discuss what kind of weight, gravity, do you think about that? Does that at all cross your mind? Not that you as a believer are in danger of falling into that, but people around you very much are. So what does that do in your life with that reality?
I want to take a look at question 4, which says, upon becoming a Christian, were there things that God was leading you to do that you were scared of? And what were they? It wasn't really when I first became a Christian, but it was when I first started to actually surrender my life and surrender my thought processes and my actions. That God took me from a place of comfort. I was living in New York at the time, in upstate, and God said, go to the desert. And so my wife and I literally packed up our car. We had a little Honda Civic, and everything that we owned, we either gave away that didn't fit inside of a tiny little 4x8 trailer. So our entire life was packed into a 4x8 trailer and the back seat of our car, and we drove from New York to Arizona to start completely fresh, start completely anew. Based on what God had called us to do. And it was quick. It was over the span of maybe 2 months that God really spoke to us and said, hey, go to the desert. I have something for you there. And then we did. And that was absolutely terrifying to say, okay, let's just get rid of everything that we own, mostly, and just go to a place where we have no connections, no family, no friends, just because God told us to do it. And we did. And a lot of wonderful things came out of that.
So again, hit pause on this video, take a moment to share as a group maybe some of your own examples like that. where it felt difficult to obey the voice of the Lord because it's easier to live by man's approval to remain in New York versus following God's call to go to the desert. Don't go to the desert. Maybe that's not your call, but take a moment to just share in your group a similar situation. I'd like to take a look at question number 6. It says, the fear of the disciples was not in being popular amongst the people, but in keeping of their own lives. Back in Luke 11, it indicates a rising friction between Jesus' teaching and the religious leaders. What things is it that Jesus is teaching that is causing this friction? And I will share some of those with you. In Luke 11, verse 39, the Pharisees were more concerned about Jesus not washing his hands before dinner, and Jesus challenged them for caring more about their clean outside than what was actually on the inside. And then in verse 42, Jesus discredits the Pharisees' tithes because they were dismissing showing justice and the love of God to other people. They were more concerned about how good they looked in their tithing. And then in verse number 43, the Pharisees also valued their position amongst others more important than how God was changing them personally. So as Jesus was challenging all of these thoughts and all of these teachings of the Pharisees and of the lawyers in Luke 11, it's right in that moment in verse number 1 when he turns around to the crowd and he begins to speak to them, and he says these verses 4 and 5. And he's allowing them, his followers, to know, hey, these people are terrible. They're not actually obeying what the word says. And because of that, they're probably going to kill you because you're standing up for me. And so Jesus is speaking to them, hey, don't fear what these people can do to your body. Fear the one that not only can do something to your body, but also cast you into hell. And so in those few verses right there, we see that Jesus is challenging the status quo that is happening. And in that same way, when it comes to the fear in our lives, when it comes to fearing people or fearing God, when we fear God, we're going to do things that seem counterculture, that seem counterintuitive, that might make others question or even persecute you in some way. That could be as little as, hey, don't you take your Bible out when you're at work. Or it could be as extreme as don't pray in the middle of a football game. Whatever that is. Take a moment, hit pause on the video, and discuss some of those things that you feel like Jesus has called us to do that might bring about persecution. But we shouldn't fear the persecution because we're trusting in the one that's saving our soul.
I want to take a look at question number 8, which reads, are you able to recognize habits or patterns you have adopted that were birthed from the fear of man? We all should be able to do that. What do we do in our daily lives that we do because we're afraid of what man thinks of us versus what God thinks of us?
Yeah.
Things like how we dress, our language that we use are just some examples that come to the top of my head about things that we do. Even in like social gatherings, like how do we communicate with our friends? Is the way we talk to our friends different than the way we talk to our family, or different than the way we talk to each other at church? How do we dress? Are we dressing modestly, or are we dressing to gain approval from someone else? Those are just two examples of things that we do in our daily lives that are really built on the fear of man and his approval than of God and his approval.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways we can get ourselves really caught in looking for the approval of man just in what we do on our social media. I know everybody likes getting a like on their Instagram picture, and comes down to like, how many did I get? How many followers do I have? In a weird way too, in the church world, especially like church workers, like it's almost like there's a competition to try to honor God the most with your social media, but you're still kind of getting likes on the way through. And so you put that spiritual air on the top of it, but you're really like trying to get the approval of man in there. So I think in a roundabout way, that's the fear of man, because you're afraid that people won't approve of you. And as like a church worker, or like maybe you volunteer here at the church, like you want people to see that, look, I'm doing my good work, I'm doing my good deed, and it's not really doing it for God at that point. You're looking for the approval of man. I mean, Jesus was talking about like the Pharisees that pray out on the street, and it's
Yeah.
like, you got your reward right there, guys.
Yeah.
Like you got the attention that you wanted. God's not going to be super jazzed about that because you're not doing it to connect with God.
Yeah, that's like when we post our devotional from that day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something like that.
And I
Here's
think
what
in
God
a
told
lot
me.
of ways, a lot of us are guilty of like,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that like my Bible's, it's on a good verse and it's set up real nice, and
Yeah.
my coffee's right here and my table's clean, and
Yeah.
like, yeah.
That's for sure a difficult one. One personally that I could think of where I've allowed the fear of man to be greater than my fear of the Lord. It's been easy for me to talk to any stranger, whoever, about Jesus, about how good he is, about some good books that I've been reading, or even just about the Bible itself. And but then when it comes to my family, I just like kind of shut down because like I don't want to rock the boat there. I don't want to have them see me as that disturbing Christian in their life. It's like, oh, he's around here, we're gonna hear it. Like I know what that feels like looking at other people sometimes, and so I didn't want to be that for my family. But this Christmas I got some devotionals for my sister and her husband and my mom and my dad, and just said, hey, like this has been an impactful book for me, and I think it would be good for you guys as well. So there's an example where I definitely was living with the fear of man versus the fear of God, but I took a little step in what I feel like is a good direction of going ahead and being that sore thumb Christian in their life that's not going to let them not know how good Jesus is. Take a moment, hit pause on the video again, and share this question amongst yourselves. And lastly, we just want to leave question 10 for you guys to discuss. Feel free to go back and answer any of the other questions as well that we missed, or maybe you didn't get enough time on. Please feel free to do that. Question number 10 says, what would you do differently in 2019 if you lived as though you truly believed that God is with you, even when people seem against you? So I guess I sort of shared that already in a small example this past Christmas with my family, and now I'll just make a habit of texting them and just checking in and seeing how the reading's going as I read along with them. But take some time, maybe pray before you answer this question, have a moment of silence amongst you guys, and really try to hear from the Lord of what it is that you could take in 2019 to live fearlessly, knowing that God is with you. Thanks for watching this week's video. Thanks guys for being here. We won't clap because it'll ruin the mic, and we will see you guys next week.